Karl, we talked last week, and our conversation is now almost completely old, expired, and outdated in a week.
Well, that's kind of the way that life works right now, right? I mean, but hey, I got another espresso here. This one's spiked.
I is it picking up speed to you right now? Everything that's happening?
Um, I'm a little surprised because I expected to be disappointed, and I still do. But
Disappointed how, Karl?
um, well, Trump. This is Trump's second time around the park, right? The first time was his first term. He made a lot of noise about things he was going to do, especially in the medical area, and then he did none of them. And so, and the argument was, well, the swamp blocked me and this and that and everything. Well, no, the executive office has a great deal of power, and you have to be judicious in how you use it. I mean, one of the things that I brought up when I was on the last time is the fact that he wanted that question about citizenship on the census, which he had the right to do, because that's part of the executive's responsibility. The problem is that he didn't do it through the advice and the notice and notice of rulemaking and such process of publishing it in the Federal Register and taking comments for the 30 days, and then you issue a final rule. Well, he didn't do that. He just went ahead and by executive fiat said to do it, got sued, and it was enjoined. If he'd done it the right way, that question would have been on the census. That cost the Republicans probably 6 seats in the House. And that was just plain stupidity. And it was his fault, absolutely 100% his fault, because that question should have been on the census. And the only reason it wasn't was because he was an arrogant prick. And so that he's now doing things within the remit, and like this USAID thing, the screaming that's coming from the left on this is hilarious, because USAID is under the State Department.
Karl, Karl, let me interrupt you. My
Yeah.
mother made it a point to correct me of this morning, so I don't know if this is true or not, but I'm going to give her a shout out because she said it's not USAID. That's what the Democrats say. It's USAID. I don't know if that's
Correct.
true or not. Oh, it is? Okay.
Yeah.
And I said, Mom, it's no big deal. It's USAID. Whatever. But I just, you said that.
It's AID. Yeah, it's AID, but it is.
It just made me laugh just because my mother made it a point to call.
It exists for the purpose of international development. That's what it is. Okay. Foreign policy is exclusively within the realm of the executive, per the Constitution. The State Department is the organ of the executive that executes foreign policy. These are raw facts. And Samantha Powers, who was in charge of USAID or USAID, whatever have you, Trump fired her, which he had every right to do. Because, and by the way, when Barack Obama came in, he fired all of the top agency heads. Every president does this. Clinton did it, Bush did it. I mean, Trump was his first term was the only one who hadn't done it in the last 50 years. And it was disastrous because he ended up with a bunch of holdovers from Obama's term that hated him and would do everything in their power to obstruct his agenda. Well, he had every right under the Constitution to fire every one of those people. He didn't do it right up front, which was dumb. This time he's turning around and he's canning all these people. Well, that's good. But then you have to have a director in order to be able to take an action. The problem is you make an interim appointment. It has to be somebody who's been through the Senate gauntlet. Otherwise, their appointment is potentially subject to challenge. This went up with the CFPB and the stuff that was going on with that department originally when Obama created it. And there were problems there because that director was not originally confirmed. Well, interim appointments can serve until the close of the congressional session if they've been through the confirmation process. Well, Rubio has, because he's Secretary of State. He was voted out of the Senate. So for Trump to put him in charge of USAID as the head of that, and USAID is subordinate to the State Department, it's perfectly legal. Nothing wrong with it. So, they'll yell and they'll scream and people will try to sue and they're going to go exactly nowhere because that is 100% within the remit. So this time around, Trump is doing things as far as, I mean, now there's some places where he's been shaving the edges a little bit. But like, for example, this DOGE thing that everybody's screaming about. That's a bunch of unelected bureaucrats and, this is Elon's pet project, yada, yada, yada. It's not a new department. All he did was rename the electronic modernization group that Barack Obama put in place. That's all it is. And he has part of the executive runs the Treasury. Treasury has a responsibility as part of the executive to pay all invoices that are lawfully submitted in conformance with whatever the appropriations are that Congress has put out. The problem is that there's that in conformance with. Okay, so that you got a voucher. If you're stealing the money, it's not in conformance with the appropriation. It's supposed to get bounced. You're not entitled to that money. It has to be in conformance with whatever the appropriation from Congress was. That this is being audited, that's absolutely within the remit of the executive, because they have the responsibility to see to it that the laws are faithfully executed. And if you have reason to believe, as we now know, for example, that this department has been spending billions of dollars on things that are not part of the State Department's policy statements, yeah, absolutely. Yanking that back, and if it's endemic, and it appears that it is, that the corruption is very significant percentage. We're not talking about 0.5% of the total appropriation or whatever is I mean, so there's always theft, there's always scamming, there's always mistakes. Okay, always happens. But we're talking about huge amounts of money here. I mean, there's something like $5 billion went to religious groups for refugee and illegal alien assistance. But this wasn't part of the appropriations bill passed by Congress. So that was shut down. Yeah, I mean, there's this woman that went crazy on Trump during that prayer breakfast during the inauguration. Remember that whole controversy that came up where she was screaming at him about, all these migrants and all these trans people, you're screwing them. They're all scared, da 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 da. Well, as it turns out, her church got $53 million to bring migrants into the United States. So was she really pissed off about human rights, or was she pissed off about $53 million?
Is it one of the things that concerns me about this? It's necessary, but on the same side of it, what will the fallout be when these people's livelihoods, like the example you just gave, is gone? And how will they respond?
I don't care how they respond. What they need to do is be thrown in prison to the extent that they've been essentially stealing. I mean, if you are submitting vouchers into a payment system and therefore unauthorized purpose, okay, they basically have set up a grift train, that's a felony. That's a crime. If I submit a false tax return to the IRS and claim that I'm owed, $50,000 in refunds, and I'm not, I go to jail for that. That's a felony. And we're not talking about, $100 here, $100 there. This is the thing that I find so interesting about all the screaming, is that there's a lot of this that there's a political angle on it that I'm not sure I believe is actually the motivation. Okay, the political angle on it is that most of this appears to be coming from far left points of view. All right, so I mean, like this thing with Politico. Somehow Politico manages to sell a couple hundred of these so-called professional level subscriptions into places like the State Department. And okay, and you'd say, well, they're buying a service. What's the problem with that? Well, there's a number of problems. One is that it's no bid contract, which is generally not allowed in the United States, or in even state governments is generally not allowed above a very small amount of money. But the other problem that you have with this is that these are allegedly analysis services. of pending legislation and things like that. Well, the government already provides this. Okay, the GAO does, the GPO does, there's the CRS, Congressional Research Service. There's a number of internal government services that provide these analyses that, at least in theory, are supposed to be unbiased views of, whatever a bill says. I mean, the CBO is supposed to score all of the bills before they go to a vote for what the impact is on the budget, the amount of revenue it's going to take in, the amount of spending it's going to generate, all right, and produce this scoring. And this is a formal duty of the Congressional Budget Office. Well, if you are essentially outsourcing analytical services to private parties without disclosure, and those private parties have a political bent to them, you're not getting a fair analysis. And the answer isn't to have Fox News set up a bureau that does the same job and buy subscriptions to both. All right? The answer is you're not supposed to do that, because that process already exists within the government. If it's inadequate within the government, then you solve that problem. All right? If the CRS needs more people and more manpower, or whatever resource it needs in order to provide that analysis. And the reason this is so important is because those analytical services are public documents. I can look up the CBO's scoring on a bill before it gets voted on because it's public. When you start outsourcing this stuff into the private sector, all that accountability is gone. And my suspicion is that this is much less about political bias than it is about protecting money flow. Right? I don't think that preacher gave a wet crap about human rights or immigrants or anything else. I think what she cared about was $53 million. I don't think political necessarily cares so much about cutting the penises off little children because they're supposedly trans. I think political cares about the millions of dollars in subscription fees. And therefore, they're going to go where the money is. Well, the money has been, you look at the voting records, what percentage of votes for President of the United States were Democrat over the last how many elections? All right? I don't think this is so much about trying to align government policy in a political direction as it is serving your constituents. And in a business, that's what you do. But we're not supposed to be running the government on somebody's commercially biased interests. All right? The blinding hypocrisy saying that DOGE is coming in here serving Musk's political interests. What have these people been doing for the last how many years?
Well, that comes back to, and I've flip-flopped on this too. I've flip-flopped on this on where I am with Elon and him being involved in it. But I also, you bring up a good point. Look at how bad this system, how rotted it is right now. And do I trust Elon? No. Do I need to trust him? I don't know him. But
I don't think you need to trust him at all, Michael. And the reason is he's basically not doing any of the work. Okay, when you get down to it. What he's got is a bunch of essentially fire teams that are going in there with a data scientist, an analyst, a lawyer. Obviously, you've always got legal situations when you're doing audits. So, but I'll give you an example. When I ran my internet company, I noticed that a ratio that I had that had been stable for a long period of time, it was a financial ratio, suddenly changed. Now, I didn't know why it had changed. I hadn't made any changes in the operating policy of the company. We hadn't made any major changes in our pricing plans or the services we were offering. Everything evolves over time as your customer base changes and things like this. But I hadn't gone out of my way to do anything to change those things. Okay, there hadn't been a business justification for what I was seeing, if you will. And yet here was this change that all of a sudden out of the middle of nowhere came. So when you see financial ratios like that change, your base assumption has to be that something hinky's going on. So I called up a guy that I had used for tax compliance purposes and outside accounting. And someone who I'd known for a long time. I'd used him for that stuff all the way back to when I was building PCs for a living. My work with him had gone back over, at that point, more than 10 years. And I said, look, I want you to come in here. I'm going to write you a retainer check. I want you, I don't care where you go. I don't care what you do. I want to know what's going on, and I want to know who's doing it. And if you don't find anything, you don't find anything. But I want an answer, and I'm going to pay you for your time. You're getting paid by the hour. Whatever it is, right? Here's a retainer check. If you need more than that, it's fine. I said, and anybody that tries to obstruct you, won't give you access to whatever, you come find me, I'll take care of it. Because, of course, being the CEO, I had the guy that wrote all the software that ran all the stuff. I had the ability to override anybody's account. And he came in and he dug around, and indeed, what I thought was happening was happening. Where it was coming from surprised me. So, but I took care of it. The exact details aren't really all that important. But I was right, but not on the what, but not the who. And that's, I never would have guessed it. The problem resided there. That's not where I would have looked. But it's what I found. But that's why you bring in somebody outside, because if you start, if I had one of my internal people do it, they could have been compromised. I don't know. Okay, you can't tell, you don't know who's in bed with who when you have a situation like that going on. And the bigger the organization, the more likely it is that there's a whole bunch of people that know about it and are not saying anything. Because submitting fake vouchers or any kind of hinky stuff, when it's, when you're talking about a 20 or 30 person company, it could be one person, two people doing it, right? Or someone's doing it, one or two other people kind of know about it. Maybe they don't exactly know, but they suspect. They don't say anything because they don't have proof. But when you're talking about an organization that has thousands of employees, there's not, the fake vouchers are all going to the guy that never rejects one. There's 50 people that know what's going on. It's not one or two people. And if you're not stealing, you don't fear an outside audit. The only time you fear an outside audit is, of course, when the tax guy showed up, we used to have to deal with that all the time. It was in Illinois. Every couple of years, we had the sales tax guys come in and audit us. It was an every 2 or 3 year thing. And yeah, it's a pain in the ass. But if you're not cheating, okay, your inside accounting guy, he gets to sit with this dude and, he says, show me this, and he goes and he gets it, and show me this, bring it up on the computer, show me this, he gets it out of the file cabinet. The process is the process. And then at the end of the day, he says, oh, okay, everything's fine. What's the problem with this? If you get audited, Michael, by the IRS, you don't get to say, well, go away, you can't look at that. Explain to me why anybody else gets to do that, right? I don't. If I get audited, I don't get to do that, right? You don't get to do that. Nobody else gets to do it. So where's all the screaming coming from that somebody wants to audit that the payments are actually legitimate, that it isn't fraud? What's the problem? If there's no fraud, let them look at it. There's nothing there.
What about from a standpoint of some of these, you start looking at these agencies, FBI, CIA, from a response, some type of retaliation? That's what I mean by that. I don't care that people are going to go to jail for the fraud or the criminal activity, but you're talking about people's livelihoods. It's all of a sudden evaporating, and point of desperation.
Well, people's livelihoods are evaporating, but how did they make those livelihoods?
Oh, totally. I'm not disagreeing with you on that at all. Do you have a level of concern of some type of retaliation in terms of like Luis DOGE, the guy that killed the CEO of United Healthcare?
Luigi or whatever.
What the hell's his name?
You know what? We can throw some more people in jail too. You want to face the federal death penalty for for doing that kind of thing, or you want to do 5 years in prison for threatening the DOGE people, which, by the way, apparently some people on the internet have done. That's a federal crime. There's some guy put up a thing, wanted dead or alive, with a picture of the DOGE employees. That's a federal offense. Those people are federal employees. And the other thing goes along with that is that there have been people screaming, well, these people don't have security clearances. Actually, yes, they do. The president has the authority to grant anybody or pull anybody's security clearance. It is non-reviewable. It is an absolute right. So yeah, they do have security clearances because he appointed them.
Mangione is his name, by the way. It popped into my head.
Yeah, but I mean, this stuff, Michael. We went from in 1 year, we went from $4 trillion of federal expenditures to 6 during the crazy, and it's never come back down. Where'd the other $2 trillion go? Okay, Zelensky is now screaming that out of the 150 or so billion, I think it was 160 billion total, supposedly, that's been sent over there, there seems to be 100 billion missing that he can't account for. Where'd it go? It went somewhere. It got spent. Who got the money? Where is it? I mean, this is, the latest thing is now DOGE is allegedly in CMS. They're looking in CMS, which, by the way, it's about effing time. Why? Because that's $2 trillion a year of spending. If 10% of that is fraud, just 10%, that's $200 billion a year. Now, that's a fifth of what we would have to take out of federal spending if we stopped it in order to bring the budget not into balance, but where our deficit was approximately equal to real GDP expansion. In other words, monetarily neutral. A fifth of it in one place, without having to cut a single person's benefits or a single person's legitimate access to anything. That's just stolen. Now, yes, the people who are stealing it will not have the money anymore. They're going to be rather pissed. But they're stealing it. It's not being spent to provide actual health care to humans. It's stolen.
You wrote about that this morning on your blog, and we've touched on that as well, the whole CMS, and that's the biggest. A lot of people aren't talking about that, Karl. How much that is weighing on the debt bomb that we're looking at.
Well, it's all of it. The entire problem's there. It's been there for 25 years. I started raising hell about this back in the 1990s because of the rate of expansion, and you just extrapolate it out. And my original computation was that 2024 was the point at which it would overwhelm the federal government's ability to pay for it, and the entire scheme would collapse. Now, that was in 1994. And where are we? Well, right about where now. It hasn't yet blown up in everyone's face, but geometrically and arithmetically, the spending is right almost exactly where I projected 30 years ago it was going to be. It's got to stop. It not only has to stop, it has to completely go away. What most people don't realize about the way this system works is that we spend at least double what every other industrialized country spends on healthcare, and we get worse results. Now, if you think about the stupidity of that, okay, that's impossible unless most of it's being stolen. That's just, it's just mathematics. And part of it is deliberate fraud. Just as one example of hundreds, this came up during the confirmation hearings. But Kennedy, RFK brought this up, and he's right. He shoved it up a couple of senators' backsides with this. They got it in the starfish. The NIH, 25 years ago, roughly, published a study that they underwrote, that they allegedly peer-reviewed, that said amyloid plaques were the cause of Alzheimer's disease. Okay? Basically, buildup of plaques in the blood vessels of your brain. From that point forward, they refused to fund anything that had an alternative hypothesis for what was actually causing Alzheimer's disease. We have spent tens of billions of dollars and tested dangerous drugs on people because any new drug is potentially dangerous, okay, on humans for 25 years, and we now know that that original study was fraudulent. It wasn't just wrong. The actual data was tampered with. It was a fraud. Now, all these drug companies made drugs that couldn't work because that's not the cause. So all this money got blown on a fraudulent hypothesis, and we still have Alzheimer's, and we've made no progress in solving the problem because we haven't funded anything into any other possible examination of why it happens. We've blown 25 years with the disease continuing to take people's lives. And the folks in the drug business and in the other medical sides of things have made tens of billions of dollars each and every year as a direct result of this. This kind of crap is everywhere in the medical system. It's everywhere.
So while we're talking, I'm pulling up my friend Dr. Mary Talley Bowden wrote on X earlier today, "Hey DOGE, please investigate financial incentives to pediatricians from insurance companies to obtain a certain quota of vaccinated patients."
Yeah. Well, it's by the way, that's illegal. Just so you know. That kind of a kickback is a felony under federal law if any of the money touches the federal government. It is against the law to pay kickbacks for steering anything. It has been a federal offense for decades. Every single physician that has a single kid that comes in there that's on S-chip or whatever is partially funded by the federal government or Medicaid, because Medicaid is partially funded by the federal government. An awful lot of children, something like 20 or 30% of all kids are on Medicaid. Every single one of those physicians has committed a federal offense if they're being paid to administer those shots, if they're getting a kickback for compliance percentages. That's illegal.
The rot that I had a pediatrician on from California about a year ago, and they were incentivizing. He got crushed.
They had, look, during the COVID stuff, we had people that posted the actual documents from health insurers with the sliding scale of reimbursements for percentage of your patient base that has taken the vaccinations. If you are doing that as a person that is contracting with the federal government for something that the federal government covers, that's a felony. That's not a choice. That's a crime. Kickbacks in federal contracting are illegal. Period. There are no exceptions.
And yet they got away with it for so long.
They've gotten away with it forever. But see, we don't, you look at what happened during COVID, we didn't pay hospitals and physicians for success. We paid them to give you remdesivir, a drug which we knew it had been trialed several other times, including against Ebola. We knew it had about a 1 in 5 chance of destroying your kidney function. And if it did that to you when you were in the hospital, it was probably going to kill you. The odds were extremely high you were going to die. The WHO ran a multinational study, a huge study, something like 10,000 people, and determined that it had no value, that it was worthless as a measure against people that were in the hospital and had COVID. It had no value at all. And it was it's an IV infusion, so you can't just give somebody a shot and send them home. They have to be in the hospital because you have to hang a bag in order to give it to them. We still to this day, CMS pays hospitals a bonus if you go in there with a COVID diagnosis and they give that to you. This was a treatment that we knew was worthless, and it had a decent chance of killing you. It did kill someone I know here. Well, knew here. He's dead.
What are your thoughts then as DOGE sweeps through, and it appears they're looking at CMS.
Yeah.
What are your oh, go ahead.
I mean, we're going to see what comes out of it, okay? RFK, the Democrats are now, because of this stuff with USAID and all this, we're not going to confirm it. They can't stop the confirmations. They can slow them down. The way the Senate rules work is that if you can't get a cloture vote, then you're allowed, I think it's 30 hours of debate before the actual vote is called. So last night, they held one of those all-night sessions, because the problem is if they leave the chamber and a quorum call fails, they can call the quote, they can call the question. Okay, so the old-fashioned filibuster, where you actually have to have somebody in the chamber speaking, is now back in the game. Okay, because if you lose the quorum, right? So I mean, they can't abandon the podium. All right, if they abandon the podium, then the vote gets called. But they can hold these in abeyance for a period of time and basically run the clock, because the Senate rules allow them to do that. So that's basically what's going on now, is you've got everything has been slowed down this way. But these votes are going to happen. These candidates are going to win. They're going to be confirmed.
You think RFK will get confirmed?
I'd be very surprised if he's not. He was voted out of committee with a confirmation recommendation, so he is in line to be confirmed. The other one that's extremely controversial that people are all pissed off about is Patel, and then you have Tulsi. There's a lot of people don't want to see Tulsi have that seat, but I think all three of those confirmations happen. Can the Senate hold those? Basically lock them up for a week or so. Yeah, they can, because the Senate rules are the Senate rules, okay? But they can't block it because there's 53 votes. So you would have to peel off more than 3 Republican senators. And then if you manage to do that, you need the 4th one, because Vance will show up and break the tie. All right, so you have to somehow peel off enough people to prevent the confirmation from going through. That's not going to happen. All right, you only need a majority. You can't do the I need 60. I need the 60 vote threshold or the 2/3 threshold. It's a majority vote. But what you can do is slow the process, and that's what they're doing. They're refusing to honor unanimous consent for the motion to be considered for the actual vote itself. As a result, the debate has a Senate rules time limit, and they're basically going to run the clock, and that they can do. It's stupid, because you're not going to win doing that. All you're doing is slowing things down. But this is all they got left, and so this is the playbook that they're using.
Yeah, I was looking down the ticker, Kash Patel. There's a key vote that they've delayed.
Yeah, and that's the game that's going to be played now for some period of time. I expect that, now, from what I understand, RFK has enough votes on the floor to be confirmed. So it's just a question of when they get to him. Okay, and they go up in order as they're submitted. So I think he's next. I think he's behind Patel. So next week. But part of the issue I have with all this stuff with regards to the RFK and the whole vaccine controversy, everything else, is that when you get down to the shots that are currently on the so-called recommended list, I don't care what somebody recommends. What I care about is mandates. Okay, I also care about the fact that essentially none of the formulas currently in use today have been through placebo-controlled trials. None. Even ones that we consider to be quite safe and they've been used for a long time. I mean, for example, injected polio, okay, IPV. It is not the same formulation that was what Salk came up with. It is a different drug. And that drug has never been subjected to a placebo-controlled trial. So this is a real problem, because the same thing happened, by the way, in the 1970s, the diphtheria, pertussis, tetanus, all three are very serious diseases. They're all bacterial. And the way that you immunize against them is not actually to give somebody the disease, because bacteria, the way that bacteria screw you in general, it's not always true, but in general, is from the toxins that they produce, because a bacteria is an actual organism. It's not a virus. So the bacteria grows in your body, it produces toxins. The toxins are what cause the problems for your bodily systems. So it takes time for your immune system to recognize that that toxin is a result of the bacteria's presence, and therefore produce antibodies and go after the bacteria and destroy it. So the way that you immunize against this is you give the body a dose of the toxin without the bacteria. All right, now that sounds kind of crazy, but that's what you do. All right, so you give somebody a dose of the tetanus toxin or the diphtheria toxin. Well, and then your body knows what that is, and then when it sees that toxin being produced in the future, it immediately goes after the cause and destroys it, and you don't get sick. Well, in the 1970s, the drug companies made a bunch of defective batches of the DTP shot. And the problem, apparently, from my understanding, from what they changed, was in the pertussis, the whooping cough side. A bunch of kids got extremely sick, very badly injured as a result, and a few of them died. The parents sued. They were able to trace what happened. The autopsies were conclusive, and they sued. The drug companies went to Congress and said, if you do not give us immunity from being sued and or prosecuted for producing these defective products, we will not make any vaccines at all, ever. And the result was the immunity and the National Childhood Vaccination Immunization Act, which Ronald Reagan signed, by the way, which is why vaccine makers that are on the children's schedule do not have any legal liability for screw-ups. But at the same time, they reformulated the shot to DTAP. That shot was never put through a placebo-controlled trial. And there's a serious problem with that, because after that happened, you used to be able to get just a tetanus shot. So if you needed a booster as an adult for tetanus, you could get it. That's no longer made. Now you have to take the DTAP shot that they give to kids. You don't have any reason to have a booster against either diphtheria or pertussis as an adult. But you have to take the combination, because the other one's not made anymore. You can't get just a tetanus shot. It's not available. At least not in the U.S. It might be outside the United States, but it isn't in the United States.
Unbelievable the amount of requirements they put on these kids, and that's where we'll have to see. I can't see that changing.
Well, I don't know. I don't know whether it will or won't. Okay. I mean, RFK has said that he wants to see data, but he's not blanket anti-vaccine. I don't see how anybody can argue that position. Okay, I mean that's logical. Let's see the information. Let's have the data. But where are you ever going to get these trials? I mean, this is, we tolerate so much in so many different places, and yet in others, we throw these roadblocks up. You couldn't get aspirin approved today as an over-the-counter drug because it has a non-zero chance of causing serious gastric bleeding. It can kill you. And yet I can go buy as many bottles of it as I want, and all I need is money. Okay, Tylenol kills a few thousand people a year due to destroying their livers every year in the United States. But again, I can buy as much Tylenol as I want over the counter. It's a known side effect of the drug. You take too much of it, or if your liver is compromised and you use it, it can destroy your liver function, and if it does, it will kill you. I think you have to take this entire regulatory system and tear it apart. But I don't see any willingness within our establishment, even with RFK in charge. I don't see any willingness to do that. I think the low-hanging fruit for him within HHS is probably to go after the seed oils, and the other things of that general sort, especially in things like school lunches, where the government can ban them because they pay for such a high percentage of the total amount. I mean, if you think about the junk food that kids consume, the largest producer, the largest single locus of that trash that goes into children's mouths is in the schools. And it's especially bad in lower income places because they get free lunches and in many cases free breakfasts. And so now you have 2 of the 3 meals that a kid eats in a day that are full of this garbage, and it's paid for by the federal government. So that is somewhere that you could have a regulatory change that I think would make a huge difference. Now, it would take 10 or 20 years to show up in in actual spending, but the damage didn't happen in 3 weeks either. So there you are. But I think that is somewhere that real changes could be made that would actually be very useful and should be made. So.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. The challenge I have, though, because the whole Maha movement is shifting towards seed oils, and you see people that are out on the circuit. It's happening here in Phoenix right now. Some of these local celebrity that are out there. Casey Means was just here, and they're talking about this, but it's like I come back to a person like myself that used to weigh 280 pounds. I had come to Jesus moments where I knew I needed to make a change, and we have no accountability. People just don't hold themselves accountable. Parents don't hold their kids accountable, and so you got to ask yourself, do you want the state to come in and make these decisions for you? Like, it all starts within the household. And if people complain, oh, there's nothing I can do, there's nothing I can do. Yeah, there's a lot you can do, but you start within your own household.
Yeah, but the thing is I mean, if your kids, especially if you're lower income, okay, your kid's getting fed 2 of the 3 meals a day at school. I want black label warnings on the products in the grocery store. I can go buy as much alcohol as I want and drink until my liver is a shriveled up prune, right? As an adult, I have the right to do that. I don't have a problem with that. That's a decision, and it's fine. I have a serious problem with products in the grocery store that have a heart healthy label on it that are full of seed oils and are literal poisons, literal metabolic poisons. And Michael, I could tell you, I've shown you, the Garmin that I wear all the time, right? Because I'm a runner, and so this thing gives me a great deal of very useful information. But a couple of years ago, Garmin software started producing overnight HRV values. Now, the 7-day trend, the trend line that comes up is useful in the longer term. This thing is so sensitive that if I have salad dressing that's got soybean oil in it, how much is that? All right, I mean, in a restaurant, what? One of them little serving cup things, right? I put that on my salad. That night's data will be effed up every single time. If I get served that crap in a restaurant or somewhere else that I don't know that it's in there and I eat it without knowing it, it's an instant bust. And it is 100% repeatable every time. And there are hundreds of people that are on my forum that have the same results. Okay, since I started talking about this, a bunch of people have gone out. I mean, it's not just these higher end watches. The Instinct 2 also has this capability, which is pretty cheap, and it does the sleep tracking and stuff like that as well. It's not as fancy, doesn't look as clever or whatever. But people have bought these things, and you got to wear it for about 3 weeks to get a baseline established, and then you go look at the data. And I've yet to have anybody come up and say, well, I guzzled a half a bottle of Hidden Valley Ranch dressing and nothing. All right, I've yet to have one person come back and tell me that. So it's absolutely repeatable every single time. And I've challenged it several times with different types of oils, all of them vegetable oils, and every last one of them sets it off to one degree or another. Every one. And I just for grins and giggles, I made a loaf of homemade bread. And instead of using vegetable oil in the recipe, I used butter. Okay, so no seed oils, right? All right, I substituted butter for the vegetable oil, and I got a little bit of a hit from the carbohydrate load, but I ate half the damn loaf. Okay, slathered in more butter. I go into a Texas Roadhouse and I have 3 of those rolls with that fake seed oil laced butter that they have, and it takes 15 points off my overnight HRV every time. And I ate half a loaf of bread. The same thing, right? Bread. The only difference is there's no seed oil in it. And it's repeatable 100% of the time.
Yeah, those seed oils are in everything. I mean, they're in spices.
You got to really, you got to.
It's amazing. Spices.
Well, it depends on, you have to read the labels, right? So, I mean, like Lowry seasoned salt doesn't have any in it. And it doesn't have any MSG in it either, which some people are very sensitive to it. I'm not, but some people are. But yeah, I mean, you have to actually pick the, because if you don't, you're going to be ingesting that stuff without realizing it. But it is in, basically all of your, all your machine processing, any salad dressing that comes out of a bottle. I don't care what it is. All of them. Go find me one at the grocery store that doesn't have it in it. Forget it. Usually the second ingredient. So, I mean, it's everywhere. And you'd think if you're eating salads, you're eating healthily, right? You'd think. Well, the greens aren't the problem. It's, So, I mean, we'll see, but and RFK has been on this, and he's right. But again, I want to see the objective evidence. And I've told people, look, if you have health issues, if you're, I don't care what they are, you're ridiculously overweight, you got high blood pressure, you got all these other things going on. Buy one of the Instinct, or you don't want a fancy one. The Instinct 2 is the cheapest one that Garmin makes that has this data that's collected and given to you. Wear the thing for 3 weeks. I mean, whatever you're paying for health insurance or health care, if you think a couple $100 for that watch is a lot of money, you're nuts. It's not. It's nothing. All right? Get that baseline established, and then just do a notch test. Challenge it yourself. Just 2-3 days. None of those. Go, grill a hamburger, put some cheese on it, not spread, real cheese, okay? And some little bit of barbecue sauce or mustard, because mustard doesn't have any of that in it typically. Take it all out of your diet for just a couple of days and take a look at the overnight numbers and see what happens. And if they go materially higher, which is better, okay, now go ahead and eat some of that stuff, see if it goes back down. There's your answer right there. It's individual, it's irrefutable. You cannot argue with the data. It's in your face.
What are your thoughts, as we started week 3 of this administration?
Well, so one of the things I like is that, when Trump came in, first thing he did was sign about 30 executive orders. Okay.
Does that concern you a little bit, though, that all these executive orders, instead of going through Congress?
No, because everybody else has done it.
Okay, so since everybody, it's become the thing to do now to get things moving.
Executive orders have no force or effect beyond the current administration.
No, I know, but does it concern you, though, in regards to, we're moving into more executive orders than having Congress get things done and, actually going through the proper legislation?
Well, what Trump did with his executive orders was reverse ones that the prior administration had put in place, okay? So going back to the former status quo, 1 minus 1 is 0, all right?
But it's like an arms race, not to cut you off, but it's like an arms race. So let's say the other side were to get back into power. They're going to do away with all those, and then they're going to do even more. And then it gets to the point where it's like Congress is just so irrelevant that we're moving into a Caesar. Paul Craig Roberts was on this week, and he was talking about that.
Yeah, and the bigger issue from an economic stability, from a progress standpoint, right? If you take a look at where's been the cultural shifts, which always come with economic shifts. All right, I saw this thing about, there really hasn't been, you think about it, music. What new music, new types of music, new cultural generations of music, if you will, what's been generated in the last 10, 15 years? And the answer is none. 0. All right? If you look at where all the money is spent today on streaming services and whatever have you, it's all stuff that's in the catalog, all right, which is why all these companies are buying up, this old artists and that old, Rod Stewart's or whatever's catalog of music, right? That's why they all want to buy that stack of copyrights. But there's a problem here with this, in that this also goes to industrial and commercial activity. All of the big things that have made America, and for that matter, all of human progress, meaningful, are all long-term investments of one form or another. Power plants have an amortization schedule of 40 years. That's about how long they're expected to last. A dam, Hoover Dam, okay? Even the stuff that was done by the TVA, right? You're talking about things that were put up in the in the 40s and the 50s. Right? It's 50 years later for the newest ones. The older ones are coming up on 100. These are all very long-term investments. The electrification of America, the building of natural gas pipelines, building oil refineries, nuclear power plants. All of these things have very long amortization schedules. If you are in a situation as a business person and you're thinking, okay, Trump's in office, drill baby drill, no more green scam, no more garbage with windmills and solar panels and all sort of crap, which, by the way, is thermodynamically bankrupt, but was favored and all kinds of tax handouts and this and that and everything. So we're going to build a natural gas power plant or a coal-fired power plant. We'll take the thorium out of it so it doesn't cause lung cancer first. And then we'll use the thorium for nuclear fuel. And you say, well, I'm going to build this. This is the direction I want to go down as a captain of industry. Well, in 4 years, that investment may be destroyed. The problem is I'll be lucky if that damn thing's actually making any money in 4 years. I might be 3/4 of the way done building it. I haven't made any money yet. I had a 40-year schedule for this thing. I was going to make a profit from it. I was going to spend money for 4 or 5 years, and then I was going to make money for 35, right, on using what I had built. Well, now I'm going to get, 3.5 years into it, my investment gets ruined because the administration turns over and the new administration is Democrat and says, well, screw that, you have to build solar panels. You're not going to get innovation and progress in the industrial realm. We've got a problem with offshoring of our productive capacity, whether it be drugs that are made in China and India, whether it be machine parts, automobile technology, things like this. You're going to put up a factory to assemble cars, and that factory is supposed to have a 30 or 40-year lifetime, and 3 years from now, before you can even get the thing open and get the first car off the line, the new administration comes in and essentially bans gas-powered cars. Well, that $20 billion you spent just got turned into toilet paper. That's where the problem is with doing this all by EOs. It's not so much the shift in policy back and forth as the political winds blow. It's that if you don't have a stable industrial base with a stable set of rules, I'm not making that investment because you're threatening to blow it up before I can make any money off of it. Nothing that's worthwhile in human history has happened in a time space of 3 or 4 years, and that's been its entire amortized life. That's never been the case.
Let me read this question to you that somebody sent me. Ready?
Sure. Yes.
USAID, NVIDIA stock going up. Karl's a genius on accounting. How did the left pull this off for so long?
Well, like I said, when you look at the USAID thing, I don't think this was so much a political alignment as it was just a money chase. Okay, I see the same thing in the medical system. You can't tell me that George Soros was driving a far left agenda in medicine because it was, the whole point was to see how many 13-year-old boys you could turn into girls. I mean, that's illogical. Right? I mean, when you get down to it, every single kid that gets transed, right, never reproduces, can never have an adult sexual relationship with either a man or a woman ever, because that's what you did. You destroyed that, right? That physiological capacity has been ruined. So that's a nihilistic, self-defeating type of thing. There's no logic behind that kind of a policy. I don't care what side of the political aisle you're on, but what there is a money drive, because it's extremely expensive. You screw a kid up like that, and that child is now $250,000 of medication and medical treatments that they're going to need for the rest of their life. And that's all they care about is the money. They don't care about anything else. It's the same thing with the whole Green New Deal thing and all of this and the green power. They don't give a crap about whether or not you have enough electricity to keep your house warm or cold, to keep the lights on in the middle of February. They don't give a crap. All they care about is that there's a whole lot of money building worthless windmills and solar panels. I mean, why would you put solar panels? Think about this. Whitmer wants to put solar panels in the northern part of Michigan, up near Grayling and Gaylord. I know exactly where that is. I lived in that part of the state for a while when I was much younger. This time of the year, there's probably 4 inches of snow on top of those. Right? They don't produce any power when they're covered with snow. And by the way, the days are really short and the nights are really long. And when do you need the most power in the middle of winter? At 2 o'clock in the morning, right? Because there's no sun. There's no heat from the sun. It's 20 below zero, and you'd like your house to be something warmer than that. And those things are absolutely worthless during that period of time. They're worth zero. So why would anybody with half a brain in their head put them there? And the answer is they don't care if they produce electricity. All they care about is that they're getting paid. It has nothing to do with making electricity. It has nothing to do with the environment. It has nothing to do with anything. Why would you cut down hundreds of acres of trees, which are good for the environment, to put up a bunch of solar panels? There's no logic to that. It has nothing to do with green energy. It has to do with grift. It's just money. You get back to all of this stuff, it's just money. And once this gets going, if it stays unaccountable, and that's where USAID became such a huge slush fund, okay? Samantha Powers, who used to run the agency, was called into Congress a few years ago and was grilled over what they were doing with the cash, and she refused to answer. Now, you would think that would have been a hard stop on $1 going into that agency at that moment. I mean, when you're the head of an agency, you get called in front of Congress, in front of a hearing, and they say, where are you spending the money? And you will not tell them. Wouldn't you think that'd be basically, okay, so you've admitted to stealing it? Okay. I mean, you didn't, but you did. You'd think that would have been the end of the show right there. But it's not, because all these people, you know, if you look at all these, how this all gets kicked back, huge amounts of this stuff that came out of USAID ended up in the Clinton Foundation. Now, there's people saying Chelsea Clinton got it. That's not true, because the way that procurement systems work, LLCs, which the foundation is, have the names of the principals is listed, okay, because that's what it is, an LLC. Well, Chelsea happens to be on the board. Right? So that money went into the Clinton Foundation. But then what happened after that? A decent part of it got thrown back into Democrat PACs and Democrat campaigns. Now, is that traceable? No. How about nonprofits that are donor-advised entities? In other words, the people that make public donations the people who make big public donations get to control the direction of where the money's spent. Why would the federal government put anything into a donor-advised nonprofit where the donors get to control where the money gets spent? The government doesn't get to control it. That's by definition a grifting operation. The money's stolen by definition, because the government's not controlling where it goes.
Have they uncovered yet BLM or Antifa was receiving funding from this?
Yeah. Well, I mean, directly and indirectly, yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, but the big thing over the last few years has been all this refugee stuff. All right. And then you've got, I mean, relatively small amounts of money, but some of this stuff is crazy. All right. Things like an LGBTQ play, or, you know, some theater production in this little country. I mean, what in the name of God could you possibly name as a public U.S. interest for something like that?
Didn't Ben Stiller, didn't he take money and do a Ukraine photo shoot or something?
Yeah, he got paid, allegedly, he got paid to do a photo shoot with Zelensky in Ukraine out of these funds. A couple of $1 million. What possible public interest is there in that? Are you kidding? But see, that's what I'm saying. You can't even argue that there's like a left-leaning political interest in this. It's just the cash. How do you even argue that there's a political angle to it? There's not. It's just grift. All this is, it's all about the Benjamins. It's like the chick is preaching about the poor refugees screaming at Trump about it. I don't think she gives a wet crap about a single person that came across this border and is wet and tired and has torn up clothes, which, by the way, none of them do. You want to know where all that money went? You know those nice brand new backpacks and shoes and clothing that looks like they put it on yesterday, but they just got done hiking 2,400 miles? You know, I've done some fairly decent backcountry stuff, right? Sections of the AT and things like that where I'm out for a couple of weeks. When I get done, I look and smell like an ape. Right? And you're telling me these people hiked from the Darien Gap all the way up to the United States border? What is that, like 2,300, 2,400 miles? And they look like they just got out of a shower. What are you talking about? By the way, the people that are giving them all that stuff, they don't care that the people have nice clothes and a nice pair of shoes. What they care about is that pair of shoes that cost them $20, they charge the government $100 for, and they pocketed the other 80.
Are we at the end of the empire here, Karl? Right? Because the grift is everywhere.
Well, if we're going to avoid a fiscal train wreck, then it has to stop, and that's the hope. I mean, if you want to have a reason to have some hope, it's that what Trump has set in motion generates so much outrage that, and I think you're seeing some of it, because you think about this. Have you seen a Republican complaining about this yet?
No.
Not even Lindsey Graham, have you? By the way, Lindsey Graham is pretty swampy, right, by anybody's estimation. I haven't heard a single peep out of him, and yet he was all rah-rah about Ukraine and Zelensky and all that money going over there. Not one word about how terrible Musk is and how terrible Trump is, and maybe he doesn't want to answer questions about why almost 2/3 of the money that went over to Ukraine disappeared. Maybe he doesn't want to answer that question. Maybe, just maybe, the scale of this is so large, and these people have, at least on the right, now the Democrats are screaming at the top of their lungs, and that's illegal. No, it's not, but that's what they're doing. Okay, fine. Let them have their outrage machine or whatever. Let them even start violence, because if they do that, now, I mean, look, I'm no fan of Pam Bondi, all right? I have a lot of reasons to distrust her, not the least of which is she tried to railroad Zimmerman into jail after Martin nearly killed him. I was an officer in the Libertarian Party at the time when that happened, and so I was very, very involved in running to ground exactly what had occurred there. We had a candidate that was in that district, and ultimately the positions he took, I felt, were unethical and anathema to the party's interests, and I put a motion on the floor, which passed, to disavow and censure him. So I mean, it took a lot of political risk. I could have been thrown out of the party for that, and as it turned out, later on I ended up resigning, but it was unrelated to that. I won that fight. But Pam Bondi tried to throw Zimmerman in jail for shooting Martin, and Martin had mounted him and was pounding his head against a concrete sidewalk. And so, I mean, that was clearly self-defense, and she knew it. She had access to the information, and she was all hell-bent and determined to jail that man anyway. So I have, and she's never apologized for this, by the way. Okay, now she's the Attorney General. So I have grave concerns about her willingness to abuse power, because she has done it in the past, and people have short memories in this country. I don't. This was a fight that I was in the middle of. But nonetheless, sunlight tends to be the best disinfectant. If the sunlight stays focused on all the stuff that's going on, and the outrage remains high enough within the public, I think you're going to see the far left side of the aisle, the Jay Pals and the Hakeem Jeffries, they're not going to shut up. They're good, it's all they're good at is screaming. But the people in the middle, and there are some on both sides, on both parties. I think you're going to see a supermajority of both sides of the houses of Congress are essentially going to say, all right, this shit's got to stop. It's got to stop now. And we have budgetary deadlines that have to be met in order to keep the government open. I'm seeing signs that a shift, they were talking about passing one great big bill under reconciliation, right? Just in the last couple of days, now what has come out is that they're talking about splitting this within the Republican Congress into two reconciliation bills, one that funds absolutely essential things right now, none of which are likely to have any intersection with the stuff that at least so far has been uncovered. And then the rest gets punted for a few months. That is probably wise because it breaks up the appropriation cycle to the point that Congress can get their arms around the full scope of whatever it is that's dug up here. And yes, there will be some, there'll be some TROs and injunctions that are temporarily issued, but ultimately I expect those all to fail because at the end of the day, arguing against audits is a loser. It's a losing game in the courts. It's a losing game everywhere. And that's basically what the Democrats are trying to argue now, is that you don't have a right to do audits. Well, yeah, okay, we'll see. Good luck establishing standing that you have a right to continue to steal. I don't think you're going to win on those, not in the fullness of time. Will you get TROs for 2 weeks? Yeah, but then things get briefed. Just as an example, you look at what Trump did with this birthright thing, with the 14th Amendment. They have now, the DOJ has now filed their responsive brief to the injunction that was issued by those two judges. And it is a absolutely blistering knockout list of precedent that if that goes up to the Supreme Court, briefed as it stands, my guess is that it's probably, probably 5-4 because you've got three that are crazy and Roberts is probably not going to go along with it. But I can't even see Barrett voting on the other side of that one. And the case law and the record it's indisputable. I wrote about it at the time that he originally did it, and I expected this was exactly where it was going to go. And that's essentially exactly what they briefed up. So, anybody can sue over anything, but can you get anywhere? And when you're asking for injunctions, you have a pretty short leash on things because the other side is entitled to an evidentiary hearing. And you're going to get those, and the ones that have controversy will end up in front of the Supremes.
Where can people find you, Karl?
Market-ticker.org.
At Twitter, same?
Twitter is Ticker Guy. So that's just kind of a quirk of the way that Twitter handles work out. Market ticker's a little long, so it was Ticker Guy.
As always, thanks for coming back so fast, and we'll see what happens day by day, and I'm sure it won't be that long for our next conversation.
Yeah, I have a suspicion things are going to keep popping.
Yeah, me too. A fascinating time to be covering all this.
It is. There was during Trump's first term, towards the end of it, the second impeachment, I was doing a nightly what I call peachy casts, which were basically like 20-minute quick hits on all the what had gone on during that day's part of the impeachment process, and then it turned into the COVID cast because the two intersected with each other.
What do you think? Last question. What do you think the future of the Democratic Party is now? Is it completely obliterated?
Well, they've got a problem with trying to figure out how they want to rebase. When you look at the focus on DEI and crazy things that I think most people consider to be nuts when you really get down to it. There's a lunatic fringe in both parties. There's a lunatic fringe on the Republican side too. But that's not where the majority of Americans are. And if they want to be competitive in 4 years, their bigger problem is that, and Trump's too, is that the midterms are in 2. And Trump needs to make sure he doesn't make the mistake of trying to put off an asset correction and a monetary policy correction that brings prices back in line with fundamental economics, because they're way out of line now. And if he does, and he gets a crash coming to the midterms, and he's probably going to if he puts it off, I don't think that correction can be avoided. And if you know it's going to happen, you take it now, because you want to be on the recovery side when the midterm elections come up.
We were talking about that.
Of it,
I didn't mean to cut you off. We were talking about that last week. And it's only been a difference of a week since we spoke, but do you think he is moving it towards that way, or is there?
I think so, in that the more of this kind of stuff gets uncovered, the more likely you see large contractions in the emission of credit out of the federal government. And that obviously is going to set it off. I mean, the collapse of so-called AI it's inevitable. It's not to say that AI is going to go away. It's the pricing power is going to go away. And that's what's blown up all these valuations. So, just look at Google. Okay, Google came out and said, "Hey, wait a minute! All of a sudden, our cloud revenue isn't anywhere near what we think it's going to be. But by the way, we're going to blow crazy amounts of money on capex in the next year." Market didn't like that at all. Okay, the air is going to come out of that balloon, but he would be wise to encourage that. And whether or not he's doing it through this process, intentionally or unintentionally, whatever have you, I think if he's got a brain in his head, he realizes that it's inevitable. It has to happen. And he does not want it to happen next summer. Not this coming summer, but the summer after. That would be a nightmare for the Republicans in the midterm elections.
Plus the run on gold, right? I mean, do you're seeing a run on, no?
Gold is metals historically have always been an excellent geopolitical instability hedge. If anything, I think over the next year or two, you're going to see the exact opposite there, because the geopolitical instability quotient is, if anything, coming down. I suspect that Zelensky just made some noises that his price for settling this thing is either he wants nukes or he wants a NATO. He's not going to get either. And then the question becomes, okay, so we say no, and Trump is not going to let him have either of those. It's just not going to happen. So we say no, and then what is his option? Fight to the last Ukrainian? Well, Russia's okay with that. Do you really want to go there? I mean, I don't think so. That's a mistake. So what's next? I mean, the man's holding 2.7 off suit, and he's sitting across from the guy that's grinning at him. What's he got in the hole? You don't know, but you're pretty sure it's better than 2.7 off suit. I mean, you don't like that hand, right? I mean, that's definitely not one you want to play, but those are the cards he's got at this point. So, and if the U.S. turns around and says, well, no more money, and since we now know, I mean, he's out there squawking that, almost 2/3 of what was sent over there disappeared. I don't think Congress is going to give him another 10 cents. Where's the other $100 billion? Where'd it go? Congress is not going to pour money down that hole. Not in this environment. Not happening. So but geopolitical instability comes out. Metals don't do so well in that environment. You don't want to be there.
As things stabilize, you mean? Metal price, yeah. Yeah,
metals have been a terrible inflation hedge. If you want an inflation hedge over time, you buy the S&P 500, you buy the major stock indexes. That's the historical fact from the 1970s forward. All right, and that's when gold became deregulated and you could own it again as a private person. So you just have to look at the charts. It is what it is. Right? I don't necessarily have to like it. I'm just saying that's the reality, is that people that are selling the opposite you're delusional if you just look at the numbers. So,
Karl, as always, thanks for coming on. I look forward to our next conversation, and we'll see where we're at.
You bet. Have a good one.
Mic drop.